lights and sirens, yeah, it's time to go. No time to defund us. You should know that we're not perfect. We're human, we're flawed. Just save us some grace for the sake of us all. We're holding that thin blue line, 'cause that's what we do. We don't do it for the glory, we do it for you.
Hello, Vax Choice and Clout Hub community. Thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of In the Lion's Den, hosted by Dr. Bill Lionberger. How are you doing today, Dr. Bill?
I'm doing fantastic. We're off and running, first of the year.
Yep, that's right. Today we have a new guest on the show, Stephanie Lind. She's an economist and maternal health educator whose work examines fertility not as a personal use, but as a structural condition for family formation, economic stability, and civilization renewal. A mother of 5, she brings both analytical rigor and lived experience to answer the questions that most systems are failing to confront. She is the creator of the Fertility Health Coach Certification Program and has spent years building real, implementable support structures for mothers during their reproductive years. Work grounded not in theory, but in lived consequence. Stephanie is actively engaged in the global movement for bodily sovereignty and informed consent, advertising governments, nonprofits, and private sector organizations on health system design and reform. Her systems level work has taken her to Geneva to advertise on international health regulation amendments and to the European Union Parliament, where she has addressed how unintended policy consequences disproportionately impact the most vulnerable, often long before those consequences become visible in the economic data. So I'm super excited to hear about this one, Dr. Bill.
Me too.
I will be in the background enjoying this show, and I'll be back at the end for questions.
Fantastic, Melissa. Well, welcome to In the Lion's Den today. Today's show title, The Davos Delusion and the Policy of Extinction. This show is about power. Not the power they sell you in speeches and ads, but the power that meets in the mountains of Switzerland, behind the tinted glass and armed security, a world where unelected bankers, CEOs, and bureaucrats gather to design the future and then tell it, you and I, what's inevitable. At Davos, they talk about saving the planet, resetting the system, and building back better. They never talk about what happens when ordinary people stop having children, when families collapse, when human life becomes a problem to be managed instead of a gift to be welcomed. They'll run panels on climate, on AI, on digital currency, but not on what it means when entire civilizations forget how to reproduce. What about the control grid? It's being built in real time. Digital money that can be turned off. Scores that track your behavior. Rules written in quiet rooms and enforced on billions of people who never got a vote. They don't allow these questions on the stage. Who gave them the right to redesign humanity? Why is a shrinking, lonely, obedient population so convenient for their model of the future? And what happens when a small global class decides how many people, how many freedoms, and how much life is sustainable? To the globalists, we are tired of being managed, nudged, censored, and gaslit by the corporate media and its elite masters. What is the one thing they fear most? A world where ordinary men and women wake up from this planned nightmare. Behind the curtain of control, the Great Reset and population anxiety. It's an explicit branded WEF initiative to use crisis like the COVID-19 pandemics to redesign economies around sustainability, digitization, and stakeholder capitalism. Depopulation, what's said, what's implied. The public WEF materials emphasize sustainable development, net zero, and resource limits, but do not openly call for reducing the human population, or do they? What's the missing conversation? Davos talks at length about climate, AI, trade, and markets, but there is a far less open debate about civilizational consequences, collapsing birth rates, family breakdown, and the ability of women and men to form stable families and raise healthy children. The silence, combined with enthusiastic support from policies that make life more precious, urbanized, digitized, and surveilled, feeds the perception that demographic decline is an acceptable or even desirable side effect, the elite's preferred model of the future. The secrecy, normalizing a world where a small transitional class decides the framework and form a critical behind the curtain perspective that through line that Davos controls the narratives, resources, and technology and acceptable policy options, even when the public story is cooperation and saving the planet. The people in those rooms are not plotting in a comic book. They are planning how everyone else lives within their controlled matrix. Their need to control. The first layer of control is the narrative. Defining is what is responsible, sustainable, and inclusive, and what is dangerous and populist or misinformation, which sets the boundaries of what leaders feel allowed to say or do. Once that frame is accepted, any resistance to centralized technocratic management or surveillance can be painted as irrational or extremist. Control of the policy without elections. Davos gathers heads of states, central banks, and CEOs into a private environment where they converge on policy directions, regulation, and digital ID, ESG rules, climate targets, before parliaments or votes are ever seen or see the details. That means the real arguments happen off stage. What the public later gets is a narrow band of choices already filtered to stay inside the consequences that emerge in those closed rooms. Control through dependency. The more life runs through global systems, digital payment platforms, and work centralized grids, supply chains, the easier it is to enforce compliance by turning access off in the name of security, climate, or health. Policies promoted. Under the banner like resilience, net zero, or inclusion, often increase dependency on large institutions and technologies controlled by the same network represented by and at Davos. Where depopulation anxiety fits. What sits behind the curtain is not just greed, but a desire for managed world, predictable, moldable, and governed by what they call experts. Where messy humans, decisions, children, faith, local loyalties, national sovereignty are subordinated to global metrics and targets. In that model, the few uncontrollable humans, fewer there are, the more those humans depend on tightly integrated systems. The easier it is for a small class to steer civilization without ever having to ask for or be granted permission. How about this, Davos? No filters, no permission, no masters. And with that, I'd like to bring on our esteemed guest today, Stephanie Lind.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Hi, Stephanie. So let me ask you this. Did you get your invitation to attend Davos like I didn't?
Are you, I would love for you to invite me to go next year. Davos has a unique housing problem. So you have to kind of get involved in one of their houses. They have like women's houses and tech houses. And then everyone stays together and, you know, has dinner and wine together and walks to the local forums together. And there's all sorts of independent conversations going on at Davos. Many of my friends are there and are kind of taking me along for the ride with their video cameras. But President Trump is there, and there have never been more U.S. secretaries at Davos as there are this year. Primary conversations are regarding U.S. exceptionalism. It's the 250th anniversary. So people are talking about relocalization and sovereignty themes. And I think we should go. Let's go next year. Because, you know, we should have these conversations before we're in the cafeteria line at the Gestapo, I think. Now's the time to be having them.
You know, I think that they're more worried than they let on, because the narrative, especially coming from our country, has shifted so that I think they're more on the defense than they've ever been. And I think they know it, especially when the most powerful president of the free world shows up, you know, with his contingent, which is quite large, with an agenda that isn't theirs. And
yes.
They know, right?
Yes. Sanctions, tariffs, basically economic warfare. There are very tense conversations going on at Davos right now. Well said. And, one thing that people will get on your show is a lot of first source materials. But if you could just put up there, this is a quote. One of my friends, his favorite person is Larry Finks. So I have Larry Finks as one of the co-chairs here. But I just have one snippet of their quote. They put out an annual report. They put out multiple reports. And one thing I love about you and Todd Callender is you guys get into the actual first source reporting of Agenda 2030, the Kissinger report, in the NSSM 200. They actually detail out depopulation as a prioritized foreign policy. Specific nations are targeted, but the goal in general is a world with fewer humans. But I just love this quote. They say globalization is not ending. So they're admitting vulnerability here. They say globalization isn't ending, it's evolving. It's going to be globalization 2.0. This new phase will look different from the past, more attuned to the needs of individual countries. So they're placating to the sovereignty, nearshoring, friendshoring issues that are going on. And they say it'll also be bent towards the needs of workers who did not benefit from globalization as much the first time around. That's an amazing admission to me. But go read the annual report. It's really a delight. It's a delight to read.
When I think about these sound bites that they put out there, I think about a thing called sanitized language.
Yeah.
That's the way it comes across to me. Let's see. How do you sanitize killing off people around the world in more ways than we can count on one show? I mean, that's literally what's going on, has been going on, has happened, has been openly admitted. And for the people that don't know Agenda 20, maybe you can discuss a little bit of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I would just like to say, I don't know what your experience was this, but it was a huge moment for me when those Georgia Guidestones came down. I want to know who did that, man. One day, it's like a goal in my life to know who demolished that, because the Guidestones said it enshrines the goal of we're only going to have 500 million people to populate the earth. I mean, that's extraordinary depopulation. I love that those came down. It just thrills me. I don't know if you have any comment on those specifically, but.
Well, again, back to the really critical mission of, that goes behind the veil, which is, how do we continue to break down populations? And, I continue to run across people that really don't have much idea about what that means or what's happening. I mean, you can just look up at the sky and go, that doesn't look right, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just this big storm that's hitting the United States right now that's got all over the news, and, we're going to have ice storms and snow and cold weather. But the days before, the sky was filled with, chemtrails and jets flying all the way over the place, and then HARP running their routines, and you could see the ripples in the clouds, and you go, that's not normal. As a pilot, I kind of was trained in, the cloud formations and the names and what to expect, and I see cloud formations I've never seen before. I don't even know what to name or call them because they're being manufactured by who knows who, right?
Yeah, I mean, food and water additives, aerial spraying, contaminated vaccines, man-made weather catastrophes, endless wars, all of these things come into greater focus through the lens of depopulation, for sure. It's intentional depopulation is difficult for most people to consider, but it is the part of the whole conversation that brings everything else into a structural framework of an end goal that starts to make all of these pieces fit together cohesively.
What do you think, because the dynamic has changed at the World Economic Forum, especially the players that weren't there the last go around, what do you think is shifting or needs to shift on their side to cope with that? And how do you think that, we're going to be put at effect, or even on the positive side with what's changing?
Yeah, well, they are talking about some things that on a surface level, like I was on the executive team that hosted the inaugural event in the EU Parliament for Make Europe Healthy Again. And we talk a lot about local populations needing to make their own decisions. So on its surface, some of these issues that they're talking about this year, relocalization. We both have friends who, are into deep seaport and shipping logistics. So on its face, okay, nearshoring, friendshoring, that means trading with friendly local countries. These are all things that on its surface, I would say are positive trends. But the problem is that even though the World Economic Forum is talking about these things, they're missing the invisible demographic driver underneath these changes. So these changes are talked about as if they can be manipulated through incentives or global governance, coordination, and they're not addressing the underlying issue. These aren't things that nations are just deciding to move in this direction. Nations are choosing localization because they're responding to shrinking populations and eroding labor bases. So, what's being talked about at Davos as a sovereignty movement or geopolitical fragmentation is in reality systemic contraction driven by human scarcity.
And wouldn't you say that they're intentionally not talking about some of these things? Some of it's going on behind closed doors, but I would think that some of it's intentional.
The silence is deafening. I mean, ancient rulers, whether it's King David or we hear every year about the Christmas story in Caesar Augustus, they order a census. Well, ancient kings did this intuitively because they understood that the base of your population was the base of your power as a ruler. And yet, our self appointed kings of modernity are stunningly silent on this issue. And just to give people an idea of how serious this issue is, in 2008, for example, the UK population peaked at 128 million. By 2022, it declined to 125 million. If this trend continues, they will only have 63 million people by 2100. So, data from the World Bank and UN shows a planet entering demographic contraction with no known recovery mechanism. The decline it's not temporary, it's not cyclical, it's not pandemic related. Fertility has fallen below replacement in Europe, East Asia, North America, Latin America. There is now declining fertility rapidly everywhere. Africa is falling faster than anyone else thought. So Davos is treating, if it is at all, demographic collapse as like a secondary issue, like a fertility issue, something that's talked about at the women's house, like a women's health issue. As long as they do this, they are not talking about the underlying architecture of demographics as what is driving all of this change that they're talking about. As long as they're silent on this, they are structurally incapable of solving the problems that they are identifying. They're not addressing the underlying issue.
I mean, I would agree with the last part. They're not addressing it. Are they incapable of it? I don't know that I agree with that because they're capable of everything that they're doing, which is not good. But I want to delve into more of the fertility issues, but I did want to talk about, Davos has identified the fact that they have a trust problem, right? And it's kind of like medicine, right? Medicine's got a trust problem. Nobody believes their doctor anymore. Nobody believes vaccines anymore for good reason. And all of a sudden, we're waking up but it seems like they have an inverse idea about what trust should be and where the weight of that should come from versus them. What do you say?
Yeah, really well said. They do talk about trust in their annual form, and I'm glad you brought that up because they almost reference it as something that the population should supply rather than something that they should earn. And there's no mention of accountability or transparency or any efforts on their part to restore trust. They say in the report that trust is a scarce resource, the same as everything else. But yeah, their misunderstanding of the resources even that they're managing is confusing because they're just like moving ahead as if you can sustain modern complexity without a population. And they're not talking about how to build trust. And they're also not talking about human capital. So they'll talk about like resiliency planning and we're going to future proof our systems. You can't future proof a system without a population that's required to operate complex systems. So they are acting as if these things are just going to be provided, or they're assuming these human capital will be there in place. And there's just no amount of coordination that can preserve modern complexity without population replacement. It's the human capital is what's required in all of this. It's the enabling precondition for specialization itself. Without enough people, systems can't be staffed, they're not maintained, they're not repaired at scale, no matter how advanced or efficient they're designed to be. And so my point in my most recent Substack on this was just that complex civilizations, they don't downshift smoothly. Although Japan is one example of a country that's taking this seriously, they're putting their factories in other countries so that younger people can operate them. And then they are reconfiguring their economy around this. But Davos is making plans for a world that no longer exists. They're acting as if they can manage things if we're in a demographic free fall. They cannot. No country has ever successfully restored replacement level fertility once it has fallen below it. So Davos is planning for a world that doesn't exist.
Yeah, playing for a world that doesn't exist. I see an AI intersection there, because I think that they're moving way ahead of what they actually even give the public knowledge about. They have
Definitely.
a much further view of how replacement happens with AI because they're in positions to know. We get that information way down the line, kind of like the military hardware that we don't get to talk about. But I mean, when you talk about trust and the oxymoron thought of depopulizing the world, how do you build trust when you've already come out and said we need to be less people, and then they're engaged in processes that make that happen?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to talk for a minute about the world that Davos is planning for that doesn't exist, because this is something that's brutal but simple to understand. So the world that you and I have largely inhabited, 1950s to 2020, this was a world that was built on cheap energy, cheap labor, long, secure supply chains. This era is over. It will never be repeated. We had this illusion that abundance was permanent, growth could always be assumed. But the world of cheap everything, it depends on enough people working across energy, logistics, infrastructure, healthcare, food systems, and everything being done enough at scale so that you can absorb fixed costs. So if you have a factory that costs $7 million to put up, but it only charges you 20 cents for the widget that it makes, there have to be economies of scale to absorb fixed costs and to sell enough that what you're purchasing is affordable. So I just learned something else about you, that you're a pilot. You are a doctor and have been a police officer. Correct me if I'm getting some of these titles wrong.
Still a police officer.
Still a police officer. So most people, that's very unusual. Most people are highly specialized. Like my dad, when I was growing up, was a piano tuner, and he could tune enough pianos that he didn't have to make his own clothes. Like he could tune enough pianos that everything else that he needed, he would just buy. This is what an economy of scale is. It means I have a very narrow thing that I know how to do. Like I went to school to be an economist, and then you buy everything else. My dad didn't get to the point where he's like, we're not going to make it through the winter. We need to go outside and plant potatoes. And this is really the point that people need to understand, is that modern complex economies are specialized economies. Specialization only works at scale. So this is why replacement level fertility is the invisible architecture holding up modern civilization and the economies of scale that make global trade possible. You kind of alluded to, do they have advanced AI capacity behind the scenes that will replace a lot of this? Maybe. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this that I'm not going to get into, because economies are basically designed. I see economies as economies of care. What is all the point of this economic work? It's to care for and to nourish the flourishing of humans and animals and plants and the world. So can computers nourish human flourishing meaningfully? Can they do that with plants? Some aspects, but on a whole scale, not really. And so what I argue is that deglobalization, because if you break the economies of scale, and specialization doesn't make sense economically anymore. This is why, if depopulation continues on its current trajectory, the outcome isn't just deglobalization like they're talking about at Davos. It's not just despecialization as like an economic term that people may or may not be interested in. Functionally, this will feel like global decivilization in many places. The mechanism is brutal, but it's simple to understand, which is that demographic collapse breaks scales of that make hyper specialization possible. And so right now we have complex systems that have no redundancy. And what will happen as we go off of this fertility cliff, there's an image that shows like where we are in the fertility spike. We are going off this fertility spike, and what's going to happen is, schools and nurseries will close, infrastructure delays will start happening, the system will break and it won't be repaired. People will say that it's mismanagement, but it's actually demographic exhaustion starting to come into everyday life. And it will feel like everything is cheaper, that there are signs up for asking people, there aren't enough people to work in enough places. The Starbucks will say like hiring, everybody will be trying to hire more people. But there just won't be enough people. So right now I live in Denver. There are more dogs in Denver than there are children. That's true.
Wow.
Yeah. There's just going to be a lack of people. Labor availability will plummet. And I could say a whole bunch on this, and I know that we need to move forward, but where fixed costs are highest and specialized labor is most needed, these are the systems that will break down first: healthcare, infrastructure maintenance, power grids, logistics. And what this looks like as the population ages is that people won't be able to fix what's breaking. Long supply chains will lose reliability. Water systems will rupture. Energy grids will become erratic. As energy becomes expensive or unreliable, everything else that's dependent on it will be affected. Insurance companies will fold when you need them the most. I had a friend, and I'll end with this. Sorry, I just talked for a long time, but I had a friend at the King's College when I was studying politics, economics, and philosophy, where the neighborhood that she grew up in had a plane that fell out of the sky. Her neighbors helped bury the bodies, and then they stripped the materials, but they didn't have the means to kind of properly clear away the crash site. And so all of the children just turned the hollowed out plane into a jungle gym. And this is a harrowing icon of a slow motion apocalypse of what happens when businesses wring out the last bit of profitability before collapse.
I view it as we are in a civilization event. It's a civilization killer, really, because when we can't sustain population, and I'd like you to get into that more, because it's so important that we've already begun that slide. We have data that shows that we're sliding down that slippery slope, and to turn that around requires a lot of different metrics. You've got to stop the poisoning. You've got to stop the COVID jabs and things like that can decrease population, your ability to conceive, and the list is endless that humans have to contend with in terms of challenges to fertility. One of the most fragile and critical pieces to life is being attacked in every possible way, and we're on that slippery slope. What do you see needs to happen, and is some of that, maybe does it start in Davos? Or are we not even in that discussion yet?
There is no known recovery mechanism. Every society that's ever urbanized and industrialized have had their fertilities drop below replacement. No nation ever worldwide has ever achieved a rebound of replacement fertility numbers. They've never restabilized them. It's never happened.
I know that China is
Right, that's not very hopeful. Should I say
No.
something more hopeful? I am training fertility health certification courses. So if you want to help with this issue, you can help couples with everything that Bill just said. So Bill just alluded to the fact, as a doctor, he's right on the money. CHD has all of these articles that speak to the accumulative toxic load. It includes pesticides, plastics, toxins, heavy metals, antibiotics, vaccines, preservatives, artificial sweeteners, air pollution, EMF, phones, laptops, electric cars, power lines. All of these are contributing factors. And the fertility health coaches that I certify and train that help families, they help people make these holistic lifestyle adjustments to take toxins out and put dense nutrient materials into the body. The most important time to work on fertility is before conception. You have to clean up your body before conception.
A thought comes to mind. We need to be more Amish-like, right?
I will join. Sign me up.
In every way, but it's not something that we can sit around and just hope for the best and I'll hope that we get there and whatever. We literally have to attack this problem on every level. You have to pull away from these things. You've got to take control of your own environment, right? And then you've got to work toward change where you can, because it's going to take a culmination of things to turn this ship. I know that right now in the news, China, is facing a complete disaster with its population, and it's on a steeper glide slope than we are, because of all of the things that they do that are worse than we do, okay? Which is, because they controlled their population now to the point where, they probably won't be able to get it back, right? Because, they have really good stats on how bad it is. And, we're headed in that direction if we don't really start stopping some of this. And part of it is shining the light on the people at Davos, the agendas that they have. What does Trump say? You don't really fit our agenda. Your agenda isn't our agenda. And I've heard him say that recently. That's a really critical start, because the other administrations are in their lockstep, with the hook in the nose, going wherever they want. So we have to say no, put our boots on the ground and say, stop with that. It's not our agenda, so that we're not following along, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just to give you an idea of what's going on worldwide, half the nations of the world, including the US and all European countries, have fertility numbers below population replacement levels. Numerous published studies say that these trends reflect more than personal choice. The CDC reports 1 out of every 8 American women have trouble conceiving. Male fertility is also plunging as well. The trend is global. In the book Countdown, world-renowned epidemiologist Dr. Swan describes how sperm count in Western countries have dropped by more than 50% since 1970, and testosterone levels are declining by 1% every year. So if you look at the curve on sperm count and project that forward, it reaches 0 in 2045, meaning that the median man would have essentially no viable sperm. This is a global existential crisis.
Yeah. And it can't be addressed soon enough. It can't be elevated fast enough for people to understand how critically important it is for those that can conceive, and to bring viable physiology into the world, right? I mean, we're talking about a huge amount of the population whose systems were polluted with biotech and potentially gene-altering injections. And how do we become subhuman? By doing that. How do we come back from that?
That's a great question. So there's a lot of great doctors, and actually the place that people should go to follow my work is healthfreedomsummit.com. That will connect you to my School of Sovereignty, where you will learn a lot of these skills that we've lost through industrialization. It will connect you to some of the documentaries that I'm about to reference. It will show you, this is all for free, the different videos that you can watch by Dr. Pierre Corey, who really gets into vaccine shedding. It has material from Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Naomi Wolf, and this is a great segue into, we've talked about what will happen to the economy with demographic contraction. We've talked about how Davos isn't talking about it, but they should be, and what population crisis we were in before 2020. And that's a great segue into what you're bringing up, which is this, the stuff that was intentionally put into people's bodies. So I want to talk about the Pfizer files, and these are, I think it's worth time, and this is going to be pretty quick, but to go a little bit deeply into some of the details of this, because when you go into the details of something, people can have their own intuitive reaction on whether this was a crime or not, whether you think that this was incompetence or whether this crosses the line and you're like, this really is malevolence. And I understand that you have Melissa, who is actually a whistleblower from Pfizer. So you already have people on your staff who are intimately involved in this story, which is fun.
Absolutely. We've been at this battle for now over 5 years. So
yes.
And we're still trying to wake people up every day. And just like the election, it's working. Okay.
It is.
We're 100 times bigger than the legacy news. They just got to catch up and realize it. So.
That's right. Yeah. Well, the Pfizer files, this is an incredible story about thousands of people who worked namelessly and thanklessly behind the scenes throughout the COVID era. Through the story, you're going to get a sense of just like how much needed to be done, because there was how much we needed to storm the system and understand the system in order to force it to give us justice and basic human rights. So the context of the story is that the government gave Pfizer billions. They mandated Americans to take this product, prevented us from suing for harms, and then refused to let Americans see the data that was underlying this licensure. So when the FDA required Pfizer to collect all of this data, this is what some of this is based on. The FDA said that all of this would be they promised full transparency. They required Pfizer to collect data on adverse events related to vaccination when it was released. And so now we have this confidential document. It's 536, the cumulative analysis of post-authorization adverse events reports is its name. And this is a data set of the first 68 days of the vaccine rollout from December 20th, 2020 to February 28th, 2021. So they collected this data, but then the FDA asked the courts to keep these documents sealed for 75 years. They wanted everyone in the room to be dead before this evidence ever saw the light of day. And the federal court ended up ordering the release of the documents, but we had to FOIA request them. So we had to put in a Freedom of Information Act. And there was a successful lawsuit by the Public Health and Medical Professionals for Transparency. This was a group of professionals that came together from Harvard, Yale, UCLA, who demanded a timely production of the documents. Now, I'm going to pause here in the story. What is your response to this level of just incompetence, malevolence?
It's not just incompetence. I mean, it is so in your face. What it also speaks to is that they not only did they know before this was launched, but that they knew shortly after this launch that it was damaging humans. Okay, it was causing adverse events, it was killing people, and they wanted to hide it. And then just like the Kennedy assassination, let's hide it until everybody's dead, and then nobody cares anymore, right? And we're all scot-free. But we also learned that in those documents there were close to 1,300 conditions that they knew about that they didn't share in those blank insert pages that people should pay attention to. That's where they talk about the adverse events and the things that you shouldn't do, etc., where they will actually talk about them. Is that all of it? No, but they put some of that in there. But under the emergency use, they were enabled under the military control piece to not tell you. And so when we were asking the pharmacists and the doctors and they were coming up blank and couldn't answer the question, it's because they actually couldn't look at it and pull it up and read it, right? So a really big deal in terms of, effects on humans from then going forward. And they're still putting the jab in every day. And these medical institutions are still forcing people that are saddled to it, like our nursing students and others, to get the jab. And you think, well, how counterintuitive is that? I'm going to give you the potential of myocarditis, myopericarditis, blood clotting, and the other 1,300 conditions, all organ system potential issues and inflammatory syndromes. And I'm going to expect you to become a really effective and qualified nurse. I mean, is it just to get in lockstep? Is that what it's all about? So we control you all the way through, or we kill part of you along the way, which is what they've done.
Very well articulated. Yes. I mean, you're alluding to what a lot of what's in these documents. They were so massive and so filled with information, so technical, that after all this work that we did with the FOIA requests and the lawsuits and all this stuff, Naomi Wolf was like, no journalist is going to be able to go through this. So Chris Flowers, who I got to know at our advisement initiative at the 2024 World Health Organization Health Week in Geneva, Switzerland. I had a wonderful time walking through Switzerland with him. And he described to me how they put a call out for 3,250 doctors and scientists. And these were volunteers, nameless, thankless people who waded through this mountain of information to produce the historical effort now known as the Pfizer Papers, which you can go on Amazon and get this book. I'm going to highlight just a few shocking features of what we discovered from these internal documents before I go into reproductive harms. So the first thing is that it reveals that Pfizer and public health agencies manipulated clinical trial data to delay reporting deaths of trial participants. Like, I think people died and then they literally just kept them on ice and then said that they died later so that they could meet safety targets and claim the vaccine was safe and effective.
And they also changed how they died. So if you came in and you died from that, you died from something else,
I would like to highlight that point for a moment because the CDC writes the rules of how deaths are reported, and they changed their own law, which had been in place for 17 years, which is that we distinguish in our death certificates what you died of and what you died with. So if you got in a car crash but had cancer, you died of a car crash with cancer. Like George Floyd was a part of the COVID statistics because he was found to have COVID at the time of death. And the CDC eliminated their own reporting to say what you died with versus what you died of. So thank you for bringing that up. That was nuts.
And it continues to be nuts.
Yes. So that was the first thing that was amazing. Another shocking admission is that Pfizer defined exposure to the mRNA vaccine to include skin contact, inhalation, That's breathing on someone, and sexual contact, especially around conception. I've already referenced that Dr. Pierre Corey has the most comprehensive treatment on vaccine shedding. I would direct you to his Substack to learn more about that issue. But what we basically know, and you already said this, Pfizer knew the mechanisms of injury. It knew how it hurt people, what hurt people in the shots and how it hurt them. So the pharmacokinetics of how vaccines biodistribute nanolipid particles, spike protein, and petroleum byproducts to every organ in the body, and how this influenced reproduction. They already knew that. This was a feature of the mRNA vaccines to go through every membrane in the body. We already knew that before we mandated the shots. We knew that these agents had particular concentration in the ovaries. The documents show a comprehensive attack on human reproductive capacity with harms on sperm count, sperm mobility, harms to your ovaries, menstrual cycles, placenta. And Pfizer breaks down this. It says that women sustain 72% of them. In their own words, 16% are reproductive disorders. The effects that it caused on periods were amazing. It showed 15,000 women bleeding every day, 10,000 women were having 2 periods a month, 7,500 women were not having periods at all, meaning they were effectively sterilized. But I'd like to just here in closing on this section, highlight the pregnancy and lactation report, because this section covering pregnancy reveals that 20% of all of the cases were serious, according to Pfizer's own language. There were 2 babies that died in utero. Pfizer itself concluded that the deaths were due to maternal exposure to the vaccine. They also showed that babies were getting very sick, even just from nursing. They showed 25 miscarriages, 5 fetal deaths, uterine contractions that caused preterm deliveries, premature rupture of the membranes, and fetal growth restriction. The most amazing part of this story is that these numbers are just from the data that we have retained. Pfizer lost. It lost records from 234 individual women who happened to be pregnant. It just happened to lose those 234 reports. And I was putting this through chat, and chat said, Pfizer followed the outcomes for only 32 of the pregnancies. And it's like, no, the data is lost. So they didn't follow the rest. But for the 36 pregnant women whose records survived, over 80% of them had spontaneous abortion and miscarriage. So if you look at this data on the upper right, it shows that women who got the vaccine, this is another data set. This is openvaers.com. You see there that women had all of these miscarriages on onset day, on day 0. So many of these women got the vaccine, and on the same day they miscarried. And I have one last story. This is just really the story about one image. If you could show the image about Google. Google's system shows you how many people on a given day look up various search terms. So this is an image of Google's own internal reporting system on the amount of women who Googled the term miscarriage after the vaccine. So you can see a clear spike when the vaccine rolled out, that women were all like, why do you think a whole bunch of women all of a sudden Googled this term? It's because they were having miscarriages. It's egregious.
Yeah, it's a great piece of data. Another thing too is the horizon of testing. So, we're learning these stats and these numbers and these percentages based on sometimes small groups, because we don't have the help of a lot of the medical side to get this done. So it's having to be done, without that kind of investment and time. But when you think about long-term studies, these numbers are going to get worse. They're going to show worse. They're going to get worse. And I believe it's the tip of the iceberg in terms of really coming back to the focus of fertility. And one of the most critical events to happen that is contrary to proper fertility, which is, putting these bioweapons into people's systems. And then, it's the Mengele experiment that see what happens. Well, you already know what's going to happen. It's been bad, but worse than people could even imagine. And as much as we work on our side with Frontline to aid and help people, there's still people that, they've got to go try to make a living, and they're battling the system to try to get through it, to try to get the bodily autonomy and the freedom to not take a bioweapon and just exist and go to work. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for all of your work to do that, because people evading these shots that are mandated is critical. That's really, really important.
So, back to the big picture, we have this collapse going on. From your perspective, can you line out what you think we need to be doing and how we need to be attacking this problem?
I believe in the accumulative toxin load. So I think that people need to be detoxing at a cellular level. You need to be detoxing and never stop detoxing. You need to limit your exposure to these types of toxins. And people need to be recognizing they can't just delay and put off fertility until they're 38 and then start trying. This is really something that people need to attend to and not just assume. So if this is something that people care about, really getting involved as a fertility health coach, because the changes that people need to make to their lives, whether it's like throw out most of your makeup, all of your clothes have synthetic materials in them. There are really simple, effective things that people can do. Like one of my favorite doctors says, give yourself a fever every day. Your fever is your body's system that helps detoxify itself. And so raising your metabolic state to the point where you are sweating, consistently sweating. A lot of people who have had debilitating vaccine like effects in their body and things that were really difficult to know how to fix or solve, if they just spent an hour running, sweating in a sauna, raising their metabolic state and their human growth hormone for an hour a day, a lot of them had unbelievable recoveries. But this is something, if you go into Health Freedom Summit, we have a whole bunch of different doctors, a whole bunch of different protocols, a lot of individual things recommended for people to detox from this.
So what you're really referencing is toxic load.
Yeah.
In the current environment that we're in, everybody's got a certain level of toxic load. If you took the jab or you got shedded on by somebody, which is a real thing, and people still act like it doesn't exist, which it does, toxic load is really the mothership in terms of how your body functions. But we have these amazing bodies whose job it is to fix, repair, and we get out of its way and we help it along.
Yeah.
It will do things because it knows how to do those things.
That's right.
And how do we interrupt these metals, and how do we get them out with chelation and other kinds of things that can disrupt these processes and this toxic load? So we need to be disruptors of it. We need to be cleansers of it and assisting and aiding, and sometimes also fasting, which is a important piece of basically getting rid of the toxins and letting your body recover as you work through waves of that cleansing, right?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that we teach our fertility health coach students is we have a whole protocol where you can do the whole thing and never spend $1. And it's things like fasting, restorative sleep, making sure your REM cycles are long enough, like giving yourself a fever every day. For men, if you get sufficient sunlight on the testicles, that is shown to boost sperm mobility. So there's like a ton of free stuff that you can do to support your body. But like you said, the body is naturally healing. And so these are things that with proper sleep and nutrition, the body does have the intelligence to heal itself.
I wanted to just throw a little bit of shade on vaccines for a minute, because there's still people running around thinking that some of them are good for them, and they really haven't done any research, I don't believe. And then you have this medical system that's incentivized its doctors and its pediatricians to have a great financial incentive, almost no training in terms of what's bad in them. And then they train them on how to convince those families to put these jabs in with fear and other, because it surrounds us. We have countless, conversations with families that they were just driven to fear, and either, you're going to take this or you're going to get out of my office kind of scenario. And I just wanted to pull up one ingredient for a moment to just highlight one of many in terms of how dangerous these things are. And I'm going to talk about thimerosal and the studies. Now, how much mercury is supposed to be in the body? The answer should be 0, right? Because mercury is one of the most dangerous substances on the planet. When you show up and mercury is in the workspace, you have special ways to handle it, special ways not to breathe it, special ways not to come in contact with it with humans, because it's highly dangerous, caustic, and can cause all kinds of problems. Yet, we're putting this in countless vaccines, and giving it to our children in multiple doses. And it causes a lot of problems. And I put up a listing of them. Infants who received vaccines containing mercury had significant increased odds of being diagnosed with autism. It's in the news all the time right now, autism, right? And they keep trying to say, well, it must be this and that and something else, trying to obfuscate the truth of it. There's so much evidence that points and shows that these neurologic caustic substances are contributing and causational. It's asked and answered. There's no question as to whether it is. Neurodevelopment disorders, psychomotor development issues. Boys that receive the hepatitis B vaccine, 3 times more likelihood of boy developing autism. And the list goes on and on, right? I just scratched the surface with that. And it doesn't even address all the things that go into this dangerous cocktail, and each one is dangerous, right? So I would just urge people to do your homework, do your own research. Don't listen to these people that put on a white coat and pretend like they know what they're saying when they don't. Most of them that I run into have very little understanding of the dangerous ingredients, the cocktails, and of course they can't answer the question, well, when you mix this one and this one and this one, what do you get? You get a damaged medical child for life, right?
This is something that you don't like, yes, do your own research, but in case vaccine ingredients isn't your favorite thing to research. I mean, it's hard because this stuff is scrubbed from the internet. Doctors who talk about it lose their medical license. Books that talk about it, the Biden administration had them removed from Amazon. So you would have to know the title and go to the publisher. It actually is hard to find information on this for a lot of people. But even if you don't do the research, which you should, but if you don't, you can still engage with this by just asking questions. It is unbelievable how often these topics can come up in everyday conversation if you just push it. For example, I'm at the post office and they say, does your package include anything liquid, perishable, or potentially hazardous? And I'm like, you have to, does it have mercury in it? And I'll say, well, I really wish Pfizer was, made to disclose what's in its shots. I'm pretty sure there's mercury in there. These little comments. It is the person who calls me to ask, would you like a PayPal loan? Well, I happened to be in the car and had time to take his call. So he was like, what do you do in your business? Well, I told him. Like, it is amazing how many conversations you can have a day. And you don't even have to be knowledgeable. You can just ask questions. Like, does this make sense to you? But I want to highlight something else that you said, which is that it's hard to find to have data on this. So you talked about the incentivization of doctors. Part of how that happens is they carry medical insurance, and just the same way that if you have a great driver's record, you pay less in insurance. The mechanism of how this is, part of how it happens is that they pay less medical insurance premiums if a certain percentage of their demographic is up to date on all of their vaccines. And like Dr. Paul Thomas, for example, lost over $1 million in annual revenue when he stopped bringing all of his patients up to the vaccine schedule. Right now, a doctor can bill its billable time with the codes, the ICD-10 codes, for them to bill for counseling someone who's vaccine hesitant. And yet we cannot figure out how to get an ICD-10 code for vaccine injury. Vaccine injury is lumped in pediatric vaccines, elderly flu vaccines, international travel vaccines. All of that is lumped together. And instead of just having, like, we have different codes for if, like, you have an alligator bite on the upper quadrant of your shin versus the lower. Like, it is actually a joke in the medical world, like how many codes there are. And yet we cannot get a clean data set for vaccine injuries. And I just want to tell this story really, really quick about this one data set that we had, because it was so historical. And I remember when this came out, I remember crying. I remember thinking, we've made it. This is so clear. This is like a statistician's like wet dream. There are only 3 people in the entire military that were allowed to put data into the Defense Medical Epidemiology database. And it is a closed system. It is up-to-date data for every person in the U.S. military, their existing diseases, medical history, personal data. So we have all of this data from before 2001. We had what all of the baseline numbers were. And when Thomas Renz brought this data set to a Senate hearing, I literally was crying because I did so many things that felt like they weren't making a difference. And I was like, we've made it. We've made it. This data set is so clear. This people will stop with the narrative and we will be legitimized, because what this data said is that the number of total spontaneous abortions, which is miscarriages, every year for the past 5 years was only 990. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. 1,499.3. In 2021, when the shots rolled out, the number of spontaneous abortions was 3,527. Every single one of these is a child that was never born. So the DMED data revealed these trends across the board: 279% increase in miscarriages, 487% increase in breast cancer, 155 increase in birth defects, 471% increase in female infertility, 350% increase in male infertility, 369% increase in testicular cancer. I could just go on and on and on. This is staggering.
For the people that don't know what the DMED is, the DMED is the military database, which is supposed to be the most accurate, right? But weren't they caught red-handed changing their data? Along the way, they were exposed for not telling the truth. And it just goes to the power of pharma and their reach into the medical and the military. But the DMED was one of the data sets that we used along the way to see these spikes of injuries and deaths and correlate those with the Medicare databases and the VAERS and others around the world, really. We've been all over the map here. We've talked about Davos, we've talked about fertility, trust, we've talked about birth defects. Just an amazing conversation, Stephanie. I want to bring in Melissa and do a little Q&A. She's been sitting behind the scenes looking at this, especially with her eye and having been a Pfizer whistleblower and one of the important people that helps bring the truth. Melissa, you have some thoughts and questions?
Well, before I get into my questions, I'd like to give a visual for the audience, because one of the pieces of evidence I took from Pfizer before I left was the VAERS data that they knew of the deaths from the rollout of the vaccine that she mentioned here. It's at the very bottom, and it says total pre-processed reports through February 16, 2021. If I remember right, it rolled out in December. Based on the Code of Federal
December 20th, yeah.
Yes. And it says that the following is reported: death, life-threatening illness, hospitalization or prolongation of hospitalization, permanent disability, congenital anomaly or birth defect. And then it says includes 456 reports of death following Moderna and 510 reports of death following the Pfizer vaccine. And they knew this in February 16 of 2021. And they did nothing about it. And here's, the zoomed out portion that shows, this is COVID vaccine safety update to their presentation. It was last updated February 26, 2021. I found this document in August of 2021, and it's been out there in the public since 2021. And what were they saying? We know what they were saying. They were saying VAERS isn't a reliable source, right? It's not reliable because it's so low, the reporting. It's actually higher because so many people don't do the reporting. So I just wanted to give a visual that that's a factual thing. And a simple, their own PowerPoint slide says that they knew of at least that many deaths in a 2 months time. So
wow.
Just wanted to throw that out there. And a question that I have would be, in addition to the labor availability, is the issue of labor interest. There are so many people trying to get rich off being an influencer, a TikToker, a podcaster. How do we restore the desire for people to return back to physical workplaces? I feel like COVID killed a lot of that. I feel like after COVID, it's like I'm working physically hard for pennies when I could be working less hard, making the same amount, if not more, doing certain things. So how do we restore that back into people, that desire to do something?
That's amazing. Bill, do you want to take that question or?
Well, I think it's a foundational question because, people were incentivized to stay home, right? For a theoretical disease that was using a highly flawed testing system, okay, to say a thing is a thing. In fact, as we've all said before, that the creator of that testing says you can't use my test to say you have a thing. It can't do that. And so, but pharma, in its design wisdom, decided to use this fancy test to say everybody's sick when they're not. you have people lining up, down the block saying, well, do I have something? I don't know. Well, do you have symptoms? No, don't know what that is, but I want to check and see. Put some of that thing up my nose and see if I've got a thing, right? But what it did is it kind of changed people's thought processes and took them away from and out of the working environment, especially in the blue collar side. A lot of people that just didn't go back. And earlier Stephanie was talking about the fact that we've lost and we're losing the war on this in terms of people being able to do the things that it takes to do all the systems that are coming online, or the ones that we want to increase, because we've lost the technology to train people, the trainers, and we've lost a big set and subset of people that can do that. So, when I see the president running around and wanting to make big changes, and I'm like, that's great, but how are we've got to build that infrastructure to support that thing that we want to bring back to the US, because we lost it to China or whomever. So, it's a much bigger problem than people think.
Yeah, what's going to happen is fewer workers are going to have to support more retirees, more patients, more dependents, and they'll have to pay for all of these institutional promises that were made by politicians. Like the future is going to continue to be mortgaged by politicians, but now the workforce required to pay that back is evaporating. So I think that we used to have like a workforce that a large base supported dependents at the top, and that entire period is about to reverse. So young people are going to inherit heavier responsibilities and fewer opportunities. Like the pressure of the system is just going to increase as each generation produces a smaller one. Fewer children today will mean fewer parents tomorrow, few caregivers the generation after that. And by the time all of these labor shortages show up and care crisis and financial strain, it will be impossible to reverse, because a child that I have today obviously doesn't staff Starbucks labor shortage tomorrow. If there's a gap in the replacement levels, that's not something that you can quickly turn around. So I have when you say, what is the solution to this? It's love that's present with children. It's good parenting. It's children who feel deeply seen, so they don't need to be seen by others, who have a good work ethic. They have an incredible relationship to work. They understand that, if you clean up your room and you keep the house, we can expand to having a barn. And if you do great with the animals, we can start contributing to our town and then our nation into the world. My influence is totally holistic and from how well the laundry gets done out. Because if you're not managing relationships, and does my husband feel completely honored and safe and prioritized, and my special needs child, I have no business running for city council. So when you said, younger people are opting out, they need a proper relationship to work restored, that they have a positive, like, I will take on more work. I will take on work at work. I will take on work in the city council. And they have to do, they have to have a positive leaning towards that and be people who are high contributive people who work from a sense of generosity and overflow, because they know that they're loved. They're not just chasing being seen or being in, like everything I've done with COVID, all behind the scenes. Nothing with all the random stuff to serve. And all these people, the story of Pfizer that I sold, nameless, thankless people who submitted FOIA requests, who waded through the data intelligence. People are able to do that if they know that they're loved. They don't need applause from other people, because they have an intimate network of relationships where they're safe and they're seen. That's what causes deep human flourishing, is good parenting, healthy human connections.
Melissa, can you move us to one final question? We're going to move to the end of the show. So, Melissa.
Yeah, I was just wondering, in a world where people are justifying abortion to say that, oh, we're growing so fast, our population's too high, they also say, well, we need GMO and fake food to provide for all of this large population that we have. How do we argue against that in needing, we can still have abundance in family and people in the world and provide healthy food for them? How do we get back to that, to the real food to provide for as many people as we have?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. In the 1700s, there was a man who said, like, there will be so many people, we won't be able to provide for them. And then obviously, we had innovation in fertilizer and in equipment, and we were able to understand how to make food better, and we don't have that problem anymore. I think famines are going to come, but not the medieval kind, the kinds that are based on logistical uh, uh, deconstruction of our transport system. So I do think famines are in the future, but not because we're not growing enough food, but because we are struggling to transport and move it all around because our economies of scale have broken. Um, you pose a really great question, and a lot of people would say, "Well, isn't less people better for the environment? Isn't it better for the economies?" And there's a long answer to that, but I'll just leave it at saying, I mean, even Elon Musk, when previously asked what is the number one issue facing the human population, he would say depopulation. Him and I are obviously doing our parts to repopulate the earth here. And yeah, I think that farmers are retiring and that critical knowledge isn't being passed on. Businesses are closing and they're not being passed on. So if you're a young person listening to this, or if you are a wonderful involved grandparent, we need more people to, like you were talking about before, with hard work. Get your young people into internships with farmers and with people in agricultural production. That's definitely needed and very timely.
Excellent job today, Stephanie. Great information. I think people need to be discerning. You got to be much more discerning, much more focused on reading the labels, looking at what's real food, what's not real food, because it's becoming harder. It's disguised. It's intentionally disguised. And if you don't put good food in, you can't good systems and good physiology. But an amazing show today, Stephanie. Any final words for us today?
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone to strengthen your house, strengthen your body, strengthen your relationships, strengthen the relationships within your community. And to your point, Dr. Bell, you need to be reading the labels. If something didn't come out of the ground or if it doesn't have a mother, it's not food. Don't put it in your mouth. So people need to, I think, be a lot more critical. But the upside of doing all of this work is you would not believe the vitality, the energy, the positive outlook that you can experience by being in just much of a more clean, energized state. And then that you can use that energy to make a real difference. You can, if you know a lot, you can do interviews. I just told the story today of something I wasn't very involved in. People who do the work then need the work to be shared. If you don't know how to speak, even just ask questions. Sometimes this information doesn't land until people hear about it 2 or 3 times. Just sincerely ask questions from people. If you start trying to make it a game, how many times can I bring up vaccines as I'm going throughout my business every day? It will amaze you how many times this can come up. Lastly, do something or find someone who you believe is doing good work and help them in any way. I got into an unbelievable amount of executive boards and into war rooms by just staying up to work with someone till 3 a.m, sending them Thai food the next day. Work begets work. So one person said, send this out on the AP wire. Well, now I had access to the AP wire. So I ended up doing a whole bunch of work for the Canadian trucker convoy. Wherever I could, I just helped. And when you do that, you have more access, resources, knowledge to be even more helpful. We are past a point in human history where you can attend to your own life and not attend to world politics. What's going on at Davos is affecting you and your posterity and your health. And so this is an era where every single person needs to have a shovel in one hand and a sword in the other. And collectively, I believe that we already have turned the tide on this and can meaningfully push back against our own depopulation. Thank you for having me today, Dr. Bill. I really appreciate you and enjoy our conversations.
Thank you, Stephanie. What a breath of fresh air and a positive way to end the show, because everybody's got the ability to reach out and begin to control their own destiny, their family's destiny. And it's this information that helps people, come to grips with where we're at and where we need to go. So thank you so much for being on the show today. And thanks for tuning in to In the Lion's Den. Thanks a lot.
Blue lights and sirens, yeah, it's time to go.